everyone who participated this morning with the meeting and so forth. You remember what we talked about last week, what the title was? The Shout of the King.
Amen.
Okay, well, we're not going to be doing any shouting today. Opposite. This morning we're going to be talking about the whisper of Adonai. Let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to devote ourselves in word and law. Short portion of the story of Pinchas. Pinchas begins by completing the episode which began in Balak. Pinchas had ended the plague that was devastating the Israelites while they were seduced into idolatry by the Moabites and a Midianite women. And Pinchas' reward for his zealotry was a covenant of peace, a lasting priesthood. The part that then moves on to the second census in the book, this time of the new generation that would enter the land. There then followed two narratives. One was about the daughter of Zelophehad. Yeah, that's right, Zelophehad. Wow, what a name. And God's positive reply to their request for a share in the land. The second one was about Moses' request that God appoint a successor. The parsha ends with two chapters about the sacrifices to be brought at different times, daily, weekly, monthly, and on festivals. Now, the conditions that were present during the time of Pinchas were not unique to the Israelites. They were being seduced. They were going into idolatry. They were being unfaithful. This is almost 1,000 years later, after Pinchas, the same spirit of moral decay was resident in the palace of the king of Israel. Instead of the Moabites, we see a queen from the Phoenician city of Tyre. She worshipped Baal Mechart, and she was the personification of evil and godlessness. She was a mortal enemy of Elijah. After slaying the pagan priest on Mount Carmel, Jezebel threatened to kill Elijah. So he ran away to Mount Sinai in Arabia. And so we pick up the story here with today I'm going to actually be teaching out of the 1 Kings 19, 9 to 12. When he arrived there at the cave, he spent the night there. Then behold, the word of Adonai came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah answered, "I have been very zealous for Adonai's followers." He said, "For the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, slain your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left. And they are seeking my life to take it." Then he said, "Come out and stand on the mountain before Adonai." Behold, Adonai was passing by. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountain and shattering cliffs before Adonai. But Adonai was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. But Adonai was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire. But Adonai was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a The Lord was dealing with Elijah. He was overwrought, and he needed real psychological help. He needed a boost. Now, I've been asked if I believe in going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The idea of should a believer ever avail himself of the services of a psychologist or a psychiatrist, counselor, or something like that? I do believe that there are times when we need to do those kind of things. They are doctors, and sometimes we have issues that they can help us out with. It does not show a lack of faith when you go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Okay? Just throwing that out. Most of us, however, could solve our problems if we crawled on the couch of Yeshua HaMashiach and told him everything. We wouldn't be running around telling everybody else about our troubles and problems if we would just talk them over with him. We ought to tell him everything. And when you do, again, not enough. When you do that, you give him everything, you tell him everything, leave it there. Don't try to keep carrying it around. Go back to 1 Kings 19:11, and he said, "Come out, stand on the mount before Adonai. Behold, Adonai was passing by, and great and mighty wind was tearing up the mountains, and shattering cliffs before Adonai." That's a lot of wind if it can shatter the stone cliffs. But Adonai was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but Adonai was not in the earthquake. We need to look at the personality of Elijah. I can sort of identify with Elijah in a way. Elijah was not a subtle person. Okay? Everything about Elijah was up over the top. He was kind of like an adrenaline junkie in many ways. He was bombastic. You know, if he was in the band, he would be the guy playing the cymbals. You know, like that. First of all, there was a great strong wind that split the mountains and broke the rocks. That must have been a tremendous wind. And Elijah, ooh, how he loved a good windstorm. I do too. I like to stand out, and when a storm is coming through, I like to stand out under the eaves of the house. It was raining, because I'm not a fan of getting all wet and nasty. But I mean, stand out there and watch the wind. I can do that now that I'm living in a house. When I was living in an RV, it was not so much fun. Try riding out a hurricane in Brownsville in an RV, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I remember one time standing there just about all night long with the most valuable thing I had in the RV was my computer that had all of my notes and everything for building that drilling rig, and I stood there with the computer in the back, just writing it out as the thing was shaking like this, because I said, if it starts to roll over, I'm going to run out the door and try to not get trapped in here, you know? And so it was one of those things, like, for hours this went on. And so I decided right then and there, never going to do that again. Next time, I'm just going to take the camper with me, or I'm just going to leave it and go. But I'm not going to ride it out again. So, but, that mountain, when the earthquake shook, I don't know how many of you have ever been in an earthquake. Have you ever felt an earthquake? Yeah. If you lived in California any length of time, you probably been in an earthquake. When we lived in Guam, there was an earthquake that just shook the house, and Pat said that she could see, these baby houses, where it had a slab roof on the top of it, concrete slab, and the thing was shaking enough that you could see daylight between the slab roof and the walls. I was at sea and didn't feel anything. Scared her to death. After the earthquake, a fire. But Adonai was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a soft whisper of a voice. After the earthquake, there was a fire. Wow. After all, he was the man who brought fire down from heaven, Elijah, up on Mount Carmel. He liked that too. I mean, he was. I was thinking about this with Elijah. He wasn't just said, okay, let's put the altar out here, and we'll put the cow on it, the bull on it, and okay, all of you guys from Baal, you failed, but watch this. He wasn't good. That was not good enough. He says, bring me some water. And they were in a drought. The water's hard to come by. So they poured water on it. Poured water, more water. Poured more water until the whole ground all around it was saturated and puddling. And he says, okay, now, Lord. And so the fire came down, ate up, the Bible says that it consumed the sacrifice, it consumed the wood, it consumed the stone altar. Wow. So Elijah was freaking, he knew about fire. That was something. It consumed all those that were offering all the pagan priests. Then he said, okay, now there's about 400 of them down there at the bottom of the mountain. Go get them too. So, I mean, he was not a subtle person. And I stood on Mount Carmel, and just imagine what Elijah, when he called down fire and consumed the offering of the priests. Wow. But, God was not in that strong wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. After the fire came a still, small voice. If there's one thing that made Elijah comfortable, it was made him uncomfortable, it was that still, small voice. I'm sure Elijah did not have that kind of a voice himself, but he had to learn that God moves in a quiet way. How wonderful it is to see God moving in this way. He was teaching Elijah a message or a lesson. The battle was not actually won on top of Mount Carmel by the fire coming down from heaven. God moves in mysterious and ostentatious ways. You've always heard that, God moves in mysterious ways. God often moves in a quiet way. Don't put God in a box. He doesn't always have to move and do something the same way he did it before, or the same way that you saw it on television, with the televangelist. A lot of times it doesn't work that way. God uses little things to accomplish his purpose. As someone has said, great doors are swung on little hinges. God uses small things to open mighty doors. That's what Elijah had to learn. There was a young man who lost his job, and he didn't know which way to turn. He went to see the old rabbi, pacing about in the rabbi's study. The young man ranted and raved about his problem. Finally, he clenched his fist and shouted, I have begged Hashem to say something to help me. Tell me, Rabbi, why doesn't God answer me? The old rabbi sat over in the corner, stroking his beard, longer than mine. And he spoke something in reply, something so hushed, it was indistinguishable. The young man stepped a little bit closer and said, what did you say, Rabbi? And he got a little bit closer and then he said something. What did you say? No, he couldn't hear it. Finally, he gets right over there to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, God wants to talk to you in a whisper, because that means you have to be close. Have you ever tried to calm a baby sometime when they're throwing a temper tantrum? Never happens to some babies, but I know. I raise normal children. A very effective thing sometimes when a kid's like that, and screaming at them, hollering at them, doesn't do it. And go up there and that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Sometimes God needs to whisper so that you will move closer to Him. And we all wish that God would speak to us loudly and clearly. You know? We all want God's voice to thunder through the air with an answer to our problems. We wish that God would rent a PA system and drive down our street shouting the answer to our questions so that we would have no doubt as to what we were to do. Okay? We wish that God would maybe rent a billboard on I-10 and post the instructions step by step. You know, like those vermicelli signs they used to have. Those of you that are old enough to know what vermicelli signs are. We wish that God would sit down at our computers and one day and open our email and see, we can see a message from God, okay? From God to Leonard. And it's entitled, "Here are the answers to your questions." Okay? Wish we could buy today's edition of the Houston Chronicle or the New York Times and discover what God had taken out a full-page ad with all the directions of our life clearly listed and very concise. We wish that God would just bust into our world and give us some concrete answers to the nagging questions of life. We wish that He would just tell us why He is not healed us. We wish He would tell us why He has not chosen to meet our financial need yet. We wish that He had not chosen to save our lost loved ones yet. We wish to know, you have to know that He does what He does because He is the sovereign God. Amen. That's it. You know, people ask me sometimes, you know, they will not pray for healing for people. And why don't they do that? Well, they said, you know, they come up with excuses because God doesn't heal anymore. What? He certainly does. Or they'll say, yeah, but if I pray for somebody, what happens if they don't get healed? That's not my problem. That's not your problem. Sometimes God says, no. And sometimes God said, you will be healed when you pass away. That's your healing. Sometimes it happens like that. Other times, we see a miraculous healing. You know? And I can tell you, I can regale you with stories of miraculous healings all afternoon. It's frustrating to just not know what God is doing or what He wants me to do. If He would only shout it out, then I would know what to do. Right? If He just shout to us, I would know. Sometimes we feel like exactly like Job did. You remember Job? He said, for he is not human, he is not a human being like I am that I could answer him, that we could go to court together. There is no arbitrator between us. Who could lay his hand on us both? Who could remove his rod from me so that his terror would not frighten me? Then I would speak and not fear him, except it is not so with me. An arbitrator was a referee or a mediator. One definition was he was an interpreter. Now, Job was saying, because God is not speaking very clearly to me right now, I'm afraid I'm misinterpreting some of the things that He's saying. I wish someone would come down here and could hear God and then tell me exactly what it is that God is saying, because right now I don't have a clue. You ever feel like that? I have. If He would just shout, I would understand. If He would just come down and tell me face to face, then I would understand. But right now I can't hear anything and I don't understand what God is saying. We find ourselves in the same situation many times, wanting to hear from God in the shout, in the dance, in the noise, in the hubbub, but God sometimes whispers. One of the things that sometimes we I've seen it, of course I grew up in Pentecost, and the idea that, God didn't show up tonight if Sister so-and-so didn't holler and, shout and all that kind of stuff. If there wasn't a mighty bunch of shouting and so forth, then God didn't show up. Well, you know what? God can show up and just not even say a thing.
Yes.
Elijah found himself in a cave, feeling very sorry for himself. Interesting thing about this story, it's not so much that Elijah was having a pity party. That's human nature. Sometimes, we just say, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I think I'll go eat worms, that sort of thing. And amazing thing that he's having a pity party after God had sent fire from heaven and destroyed 450 prophets of Baal. In fact, that very day it happened, God had so miraculously opened up that blast furnace of heaven and consumed the sacrifice. Jezebel heard about it, and she wasn't anywhere near Carmel. Samaria, the capital of Samaria was, which was Israel, northern tribes. It's a pretty good hike from there up to Mount Carmel. It's not right next door. And she heard about it, and she said, tomorrow, dude, you're going to be. She put a wanted dead or alive sticker out for Elijah. And Elijah, after all this, he got scared. He ran into the desert. And he said, oh God, take me out. Then the angel appeared to him, fed him, and sent him on a 40-day journey into Mount Horeb. Horeb is another word for Mount Sinai. God fed Elijah with a raven. How could that be? Ravens are unclean animals. So, was the food that the raven gave him unclean? I'm not going to answer that. That's just one of those things that inquiring minds want to know, and sometimes inquiring rabbis just throw it out there to just confuse everybody else. God provided in a most unusual way. He didn't send doves. He sent a nasty old raven. That's where we find our old lonely prophet. Here's what God had, and it was here that God taught Elijah a lesson. Elijah had no problem understanding God when fire was falling, when the earth was shaking, when the wind was blowing. But the one place that Elijah had never learned to listen to God was in that still, small voice. God was teaching him this lesson. I'm not always going to yell. I'm not always going to send fire. I'm not always going to shake the earth. Sometimes I'm going to take you to a prison cell. Sometimes I'm going to take you into the wilderness. Sometimes I'm going to take you into the desert. And sometimes I'm going to take you into a cave on the side of Mount Sinai. But I am doing it because I can see you drifting away from what I want you to do. And I want you to get close to me again. The poet John Greenleaf Whittier said it like this: drop thy still dews of quietness till all our strivings cease. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of thy peace. Sometimes we put God in the box and we think that he has to move in the shout, the hoop and the holler, and the dance. But sometimes God whispers so that we will draw close to him. Perhaps there's a reason. Nothing draws human focus quite like a whisper, like the example of the baby. God's whisper means that I have to stop my ranting and move closer to him until my head is bent together with his. And then, as I listen, I will find my answer. Better still, I find myself closer to God. We live in a society that, we're just inundated with noise and clutter and confusion. It's an age of more information, but less communication. We got lots of information out there, but not so much communication. Just go to a restaurant sometime and you see a family sitting around there.
Yep.
Nobody's talking, everybody's looking at their cell phones. I recently read a statistic that said there's been more information produced in the last 30 years than was produced in the previous 5,000 years. I don't know if we can verify that. I don't know how you would, but I do know that a weekday edition of the New York Times contains more information, or actually more misinformation, than the average person was likely to come across in a lifetime in the 17th century. I remember I was at a foreign affairs conference many years ago, and I had said something like that. They said, well, the paper of record, the New York Times, says this. And of course, I was just a young, arrogant cadet, and I said, well, if the New York Times said it, then New York Times is nothing but a pinko rag, and it's good for bird cages. Boy, I tell you, this I can't remember, he's the lieutenant commander, major, one of the, the high-ranking officer. He jumped all over me. He said I didn't know what I was doing, what I was talking about, that the New York Times is always right.
Yeah.
Well, we see about that, don't we now? It used to be all the news that was fit for print. Now it's all the news that made the fit. So, that's the problem with information. Sometimes it's just wrong. The first modern computer was built in 1944. It took up more space than a tractor or a trailer rig, weighed more than 17 Chevrolet Camaros, and consumed 144,000 watts of electricity. It could execute no more than 5,000 basic arithmetic operations per second. And the 486 processor, which now is outdated, was built on a tiny piece of silicon the size of a dime, and it weighed less than a packet of sweet and low, and it used less than 2 watts of electricity. Okay, and that's old stuff. This amazing machine executed up to 54 million instructions per second. If you have a digital watch, how many of you have one of these Apple Watches? I thought about getting one, but I have to have a watch that's bomb-proof, okay? Because the way I work outside and everything like that, I would mess up one of those Apple Watches. It would get eaten and rot away. So if you have a digital watch, you're wearing more technology on your wrist than existed in the entire world in 1961. The Tickle Me Elmo dolls had more digital technology in them than the first capsule that landed on the moon with the men. Amazing. Of course, everything they did back in those days was analog. They actually got into the moon with the slide rule. Amazing. Now there, if you want to see faith in action, astronauts back in those days, that was faith in action, buddy. So how's all this in technology shaped our thinking? We used to think, we're used to having it right now. What do we want? Instant gratification. I don't know how many times during the day I'll go and go check, I'm going to go Google it.
Yeah.
I was working on this thing or that thing, and I said, ooh, I don't know how to do that, or maybe I better check. So I get on YouTube. How do you change this in the car, and so I've got to, I do that all the time. Check. There's somewhere, most likely, somebody has put something out there to tell me how to change the door switches on my 2011 Chevrolet pickup. Sure enough, they did. And out there, 15 minutes and I was done. It worked. Had I not done that, I would have torn the door off. We're used to receiving any piece of information when we need it, how we need it. We want to treat God like the internet. Just open a heavenly search engine, you know? Instead of, instead of Googling it, I'm going to God it. We type in a question and then we get an answer. No, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes God does not respond immediately, and like the internet does. When we call God, sometimes we get that little, that little circle of death. Rolling and rolling. Sometimes God doesn't scream at us like the commercials on our television. Sometimes God still chooses to whisper. Sometimes God will speak in that still, small voice. That's why David said in the Psalms, to be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. Paul makes an interesting appeal to the Thessalonian church. He says, and aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands just as we directed you. I never really looked at that scripture. I've read that scripture many times, but just never thought about that. It says, we need to study to be quiet. Quiet. Because when we're ranting and raving and shouting and yelling and moving about, you're like, how are you going to listen to somebody? How are you going to listen to God? I don't have the answers for you today. A lot of the answers that you're seeking. People send me, almost every week, someone will send me an email that says, Rabbi, what about this? Can you answer this question for me? And I'm happy to answer the question. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes I don't know the answers. And I'm not going to make something up, even though I joke about doing that. I'm not going to make something up. And if I don't know the answer to it, I'll tell you, okay, this is my best guess, or this is what I think it means, but there are other people that say it means something else. I don't know why, but God has not chosen to reveal His answers to us in the fire, or the wind, or the earthquake. But if you listen closely enough, draw near to Him, get very close, I know you'll hear what God is saying. The key there is to get close to God.
Amen.
He's whispering because He wants you to get close enough to Him to hear Him. If you've ever tried with kids, when they whisper to you and you can't hear them, finally you get them up close enough and then they'll whisper in your ear, or you whisper into theirs. You have to be close. God wants us to be close enough so that He can whisper in our ear and we hear Him.